August 14, 2002, 11:37 a.m. The Spingar Mountains, eastern Afghanistan, near the Pakistani border. A U.S. Special Forces team was hunting Taliban fighters through caves that had sheltered warriors for thousands of years when Sergeant Michael Chin's flashlight beam caught something that didn't belong. Among the prayer rugs and ammunition crates, half buried in dust and rock debris, lay a human skeleton still wearing the tattered remnants of a leather flight jacket. But it wasn't the jacket of a Soviet pilot from the 1980s war, as they first assumed. Stenciled on the cracked leather, barely visible beneath decades of grime, were the letters USAAF and a name, Captain William R. Holbrook. Beneath that, a number that would send shockwaves through the Pentagon when they finally radioed it in. A serial number that belonged to a B-24 Liberator bomber that had disappeared over the Himalayas in 1944, nearly 60 years earlier, during a war fought in a world that no longer existed. What followed was one of the strangest mysteries of World War II finally solved. The story of a man who survived his bomber's crash only to end up thousands of miles off course, dying alone in a cave in Afghanistan, his fate unknown to his family for nearly 6 decades. To understand how William Holbrook ended up in that cave, you must first understand the China-Burma-India theater of World War II, one of the most dangerous and least remembered campaigns of the entire war. While the European theater got the headlines and Hollywood's attention, thousands of American airmen were flying some of the most treacherous missions imaginable over the highest mountains on Earth, delivering supplies to Chinese forces fighting the Japanese, bombing targets in Burma and Thailand, and generally operating in conditions that made every flight a potential death sentence. The route they flew was called the Hump, a nickname that barely captured the terror of crossing the eastern end of the Himalayan mountain range in aircraft that were never designed for such extreme conditions. These were the same mountains that contained Mount Everest, K2, and dozens of other peaks that scraped the roof of the world. The weather was catastrophic: monsoons, ice storms, turbulence so violent it could tear the wings off aircraft, winds that could flip a bomber upside down without warning. The Japanese controlled the lowlands, so pilots had to fly high, often at altitudes where oxygen was scarce and engines struggled to function. Navigation was primitive by modern standards. No GPS, no satellite imagery, just maps that were often inaccurate, compasses that went haywire near magnetic anomalies in the mountains, and dead reckoning that could put you hundreds of miles off course if you miscalculated wind speed or got turned around in cloud cover. Over 600 aircraft were lost flying the Hump between 1942 and 1945. That's more than one plane every other day for 3 years. Some crashed into mountains they never saw through the clouds. Some iced up and fell from the sky. Some were shot down by Japanese fighters. Some simply vanished, disappearing into the vastness of the Himalayas and the surrounding territories, their wreckage never found, their crews never recovered, their families left with nothing but missing in action notifications and empty graves. William Holbrook was 26 years old when he died in that Afghan cave, though nobody would know that until 2002. He was from Spokane, Washington, the son of a lumber mill foreman and a schoolteacher, the eldest of 4 children. He'd grown up during the Depression, learned to work hard and expect nothing, enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1940 because he wanted to fly and couldn't afford civilian flight school. He was a natural pilot, smooth and confident, the kind of man who made dangerous things look easy. His instructors said he had good hands and a cool head, essential qualities for flying heavy bombers in combat conditions. By 1944, he was a captain, commanding a B-24 Liberator with a crew of 10 men who trusted him to bring them home. They were assigned to the 7th Bombardment Group, operating out of bases in India, flying missions over Burma and into China. The B-24 was a workhorse, not as glamorous as the B-17 Flying Fortress, not as celebrated in the press, but capable and tough. It could carry a heavy bomb load, had good range, and could take damage and keep flying. But it was also difficult to fly at high altitude, prone to icing, and vulnerable to the kind of extreme weather conditions common over the Himalayas. On March 17, 1944, Holbrook and his crew were tasked with a supply run to Kunming, China. It should have been routine, no combat expected, just a long flight over the mountains, drop supplies to Chinese forces, and return to base. They took off from their airfield in Assam, India, at 0630 hours, climbing into the pre-dawn darkness, the Liberator heavy with cargo and fuel. The weather forecast was poor but manageable, some cloud cover, possible turbulence, but nothing the experienced crews hadn't handled before. They never reached Kunming. They never returned to India. They simply vanished. The official record would list the aircraft as missing in action, presumed lost over the Himalayas. Search aircraft flew dozens of missions looking for wreckage, but the mountains were vast, the terrain impossible, and dozens of aircraft had already been lost in the same area. After a few weeks, the searches were scaled back and then abandoned. The families were notified. William Holbrook's name was added to the rolls of the missing. His mother kept his room exactly as he'd left it, his baseball glove on the dresser, his high school diploma on the wall, waiting for a son who would never come home. But Holbrook didn't die over the Himalayas. Not immediately. What happened in the hours and days after his B-24 disappeared is a story pieced together from fragments. The condition of the remains found in the cave, the artifacts recovered with him, the scattered wreckage of the aircraft eventually located, and the educated guesses of historians and forensic experts who tried to reconstruct his final journey. The B-24 likely encountered severe weather over the mountains, the kind of turbulence and icing that could overwhelm even experienced crews. In those conditions, with visibility zero and navigation instruments unreliable, Holbrook probably got turned around, flying north when he thought he was flying east, pushed off course by winds that could exceed 100 miles per hour at altitude. By the time he realized his error, if he ever did, his fuel was running low and his options were vanishing. Somewhere over what is now eastern Afghanistan or western Pakistan, the Liberator's engines began to fail. Maybe it was ice in the fuel lines. Maybe it was simply running out of gas. Maybe it was mechanical failure exacerbated by extreme cold. Whatever the cause, Holbrook faced the nightmare scenario every pilot feared, going down in hostile, unmapped territory with no chance of rescue. He ordered his crew to bail out. In the chaos of an aircraft losing altitude and control, in the darkness or storm conditions, the bailout would have been desperate and chaotic. Men tumbling out of hatches, parachutes deploying into violent winds, the crew scattered across miles of mountain terrain. Some probably died on impact. Some likely died of exposure in the hours afterward. Some may have been captured or killed by local tribes or enemy forces. But Holbrook, as aircraft commander, would have been the last to leave. It was the code. The captain goes down with his ship, or in this case, rides it as long as possible to give his crew the best chance. He may have tried to crash land the B-24 to set it down in one piece and salvage equipment and supplies. Or he may have simply stayed at the controls as long as possible before finally bailing out at dangerously low altitude. The B-24's wreckage was found in 2004, 2 years after Holbrook's remains were discovered, by a team of mountaineers in northern Pakistan near the Afghan border. The aircraft had impacted a mountain slope at high speed, breaking apart, scattering debris over a wide area. The impact site was at an altitude of approximately 13,000 feet, in terrain so remote and dangerous that it had taken 60 years for anyone to stumble across it. Some remains of crew members were found in and around the wreckage, but they were incomplete, scattered by weather and animals over decades. Holbrook's body was found 47 miles from the crash site, in a cave at an altitude of 9,000 feet. That distance and the location suggest something extraordinary. That William Holbrook survived the crash, possibly injured but mobile, and traveled nearly 50 miles through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth, probably trying to reach civilization, trying to get home. Imagine what that journey must have been like. He was in his flight suit and leather jacket, equipment designed for high altitude but not for extended ground survival in mountain winter conditions. He probably had minimal supplies, maybe a survival kit from the aircraft, some rations, a pistol, a compass. He was in enemy territory, or at least territory controlled by tribes that might be hostile to American forces. He was injured. The forensic examination of his remains found evidence of a fractured leg and several broken ribs, injuries consistent with a hard parachute landing or aircraft crash impact. And yet he walked, for days, probably, through mountain passes and river valleys, avoiding villages because he didn't know who to trust, following what he hoped was a route south toward India, toward British or American forces, toward rescue. He would have been in constant pain from his injuries. He would have been hungry, the survival rations running out quickly, no game to hunt at that altitude, no edible plants. He would have been cold, temperatures at night dropping well below freezing, his flight jacket providing insufficient insulation. And he would have been alone, completely alone, cut off from his crew, from his chain of command, from anyone who knew he was alive or could help him. The cave where he died was a natural shelter, a cleft in the rock face partially hidden by boulders and overhanging stone. It would have offered protection from wind and snow, a place to rest, to try to recover strength. He made it inside, probably during a storm or when he simply couldn't walk any further. He arranged rocks to partially block the entrance, creating a windbreak. He laid out what little equipment he had. The items found with his remains included a damaged compass, an empty canteen, a .45 pistol with no ammunition, a small leather-bound notebook with pages too degraded to read, and a photograph, miraculously preserved in a waterproof case, showing a young woman smiling at the camera. On the back, in faded pencil, was written Helen, 1942. Helen was his fiancée, the woman waiting for him back in Spokane, the woman who would wait for official notification of his death and would eventually, years later, marry someone else, but would always keep that one photograph of the handsome pilot who'd promised to come home from the war. She died in 1987, never knowing what happened to William, never knowing how close he came to making it out, never knowing that he carried her picture through his final days, a talisman of home and hope. Holbrook died in that cave, probably from a combination of injuries, exposure, starvation, and exhaustion. The forensic pathologist who examined his remains estimated he survived perhaps 7 to 10 days after the crash, an extraordinary feat of endurance given his injuries and the conditions. He died trying to get home. He died alone, thousands of miles from anyone who knew his name, in a cave that wouldn't be entered by another human being for 58 years. His body was partially mummified by the cold, dry conditions in the cave, preserved well enough that when Michael Chen's flashlight beam found him in 2002, he was still recognizable as human, still wearing his flight jacket with his name and rank stenciled on it. The Special Forces team treated the discovery with respect, understanding immediately that they'd found something significant. They photographed everything in place, carefully collected the remains and artifacts, and radioed their command with the details. The Pentagon's casualty identification system went to work. The serial number on Holbrook's jacket led them to his service record. Dental records, though degraded, provided confirmation. DNA testing, using samples from his surviving sister who was still alive at age 83, provided final proof. After 58 years, William Holbrook was coming home. But before the Pentagon could make the announcement, they had to figure out how an American pilot who crashed in 1944 ended up in a cave in Afghanistan. The distances didn't make sense. The crash site was in northern Pakistan, but the cave was 47 miles away in a different direction than any logical escape route would suggest. Holbrook should have gone south or east toward India. Instead, he'd gone northwest, deeper into mountain territory, further from help. The analysts and historians pieced together a theory. Holbrook had survived the crash and walked south initially, trying to reach India. But the terrain defeated him. Cliffs he couldn't climb, rivers he couldn't cross, gorges that forced him to backtrack. Injured and growing weaker, he may have encountered local tribesmen who, instead of helping, robbed him of his emergency supplies and drove him away, or worse, actively hunted him as an enemy. Desperate, disoriented, he turned northwest, perhaps following a valley that seemed passable, perhaps simply wandering as his mental state deteriorated from pain and hunger. Or perhaps, and this is speculation, but it's consistent with the evidence, he wasn't alone. Perhaps some of his crew survived, and they traveled together for a time before dying or separating. The notebook found with Holbrook was too degraded to read, but imaging technology revealed faint traces of writing, multiple hands, suggesting he was keeping a log or that multiple crew members were writing in it. If others survived initially, their remains were never found, lost in the vastness of the mountains or buried by rock slides and avalanches over the decades. What is certain is that William Holbrook's final days were a testament to human endurance and the will to survive. A lesser man would have given up, found a sheltered spot, and waited for death. Holbrook kept moving, kept fighting, kept trying to reach home. Even with a broken leg, with broken ribs that made every breath agony, with no food and inadequate clothing, he covered nearly 50 miles through mountain terrain that challenges experienced mountaineers with modern equipment. The cave became his tomb, but it also became his memorial. When the Special Forces team found him, they were in Afghanistan hunting the remnants of al-Qaeda and Taliban forces that had attacked America on September 11, 2001. They were fighting the latest in a long series of wars in Afghanistan, a country that had been at war almost continuously for decades. And in that cave, they found evidence of an older war, a different war, a war that had been won, but at a cost so high that we're still finding the bodies. The recovery of Holbrook's remains sparked interest in the hundreds of other airmen still missing from the hump operations. The Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command, now the Defense POW-MIA Accounting Agency, increased efforts to search for crash sites in the Himalayas and surrounding regions. It's difficult work, often dangerous, always expensive, but it matters. It matters to the families who never got closure. It matters to the nation that promised to bring its warriors home. And it matters as a reminder that every name on a war memorial represents a real person, someone with hopes and fears, and people who love them, someone who didn't come home. Holbrook's remains were flown to Hawaii, to the Military Identification Laboratory, where forensic experts worked to confirm identities and prepare remains for burial. The process took months, careful analysis, repeated testing, extensive documentation. Finally, in June 2003, William Holbrook was returned to Spokane, Washington, to the city he'd left as a young lieutenant in 1942, coming home at last as a captain who'd earned his rank through courage and endurance. His funeral was attended by hundreds, veterans who'd flown the hump, old men now who remembered what it was like to cross those mountains in aircraft that were barely adequate for the task. His surviving sister, who cried as the flag-draped coffin was carried into the church, who'd waited 60 years for this day, who'd kept faith that someday, somehow, her brother would come home. Military officials representing every service. Local politicians offering words about sacrifice and duty. And ordinary citizens of Spokane who came to honor a hometown hero they'd never met, but whose story represented something essential about their city, their generation, their country. The story of William Holbrook raised questions that went beyond the specific circumstances of his death. How many others are still out there, still missing, their families still waiting? The numbers are staggering. From World War II alone, more than 72,000 Americans remain missing. Most will never be found. They rest in the depths of oceans, buried in jungles, entombed in mountains, scattered across battlefields that are now farmland or cities or wilderness. They are the cost of war that doesn't appear in history books, the individual tragedies that get lost in the statistics of armies and campaigns. But each one was someone. Each one had a name, a face, a family waiting for them. Each one deserves to be remembered, to be honored, to be brought home if possible. The work continues, slower now as the years pass and the evidence degrades, but it continues. Teams still search crash sites. Forensic experts still analyze remains. Families still wait for the knock on the door, the official notification, the closure that comes with knowing, even if the knowing hurts. Holbrook's story also revealed the extraordinary toughness and determination of that generation. Modern soldiers, with all their advanced training and equipment, look at what World War II airmen endured and shake their heads in disbelief. Flying unpressurized aircraft at extreme altitudes where temperatures reached -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Wearing oxygen masks for hours that left faces raw and bleeding. Dealing with equipment failures that would ground modern aircraft instantly. Fighting weather that would cancel all flight operations today. And doing it day after day, mission after mission, knowing the odds were against them, knowing that friends were dying, but still strapping in and taking off because the mission mattered, because the war had to be won, because they wouldn't quit. William Holbrook embodied that spirit. When his aircraft went down, he didn't quit. When his crew scattered or died, he didn't quit. When he was injured, cold, hungry, and alone in enemy territory, he didn't quit. He kept walking, kept navigating, kept fighting to survive and get home. He made it 47 miles through the Himalayas with a broken leg. That single fact is more impressive than most modern adventure stories, more remarkable than most survival narratives, more inspiring than most motivational speeches. And he did it in 1944, when satellite phones and GPS and modern rescue equipment didn't exist, when being shot down meant you were on your own, when survival depended entirely on your own resources and determination. The Air Force's survival training today teaches techniques and strategies, gives pilots tools and knowledge. But in 1944, you got a pistol, a compass, a survival kit with basic supplies, and the hope that you'd figure it out if it came to that. Most didn't. Most died within days of going down. That Holbrook lasted over a week, covered that much distance, nearly made it out. That's extraordinary. The cave where he died has become something of a pilgrimage site. Military teams operating in the area have visited it, left tributes, paid respects. The Afghan government, despite all its chaos and the ongoing conflict, has indicated the site should be protected as a memorial. Local tribesmen, told the story of the American pilot who died trying to get home, have expressed respect for his courage. In a region where war has been constant for generations, where courage and endurance are valued above almost everything else, Holbrook's story resonates. There's something profound in the image of that Special Forces team in 2002, hunting terrorists in caves, finding instead the remains of a pilot from a completely different war. It's a reminder that Afghanistan has been the graveyard of empires and the battlefield of great powers for centuries. The British fought there in the 19th century and learned hard lessons about Afghan resistance. The Soviets fought there in the 1980s and were bled white in a war they couldn't win. Americans fought there for 20 years after September 11th, and the outcome was ambiguous at best. And in one cave in the Spingar Mountains, evidence of an even older American involvement, a pilot from a war that ended before most of the 2002 Special Forces team was even born. History echoes in strange ways. The B-24 that Holbrook flew was obsolete by the end of World War II, scrapped by the thousands, forgotten except by aviation historians and veterans who flew them. But in that cave, one pilot's story brought that obsolete aircraft back to life, made people remember the missions over the hump, made people think about the China-Burma-India theater that gets so little attention compared to Europe and the Pacific Island campaigns. One skeleton in a cave connected 1944 to 2002, connected World War II to the War on Terror, connected the greatest generation to the soldiers fighting in the 21st century. The photograph of Helen that Holbrook carried with him is now in the Smithsonian, part of an exhibit on World War II aviation. Visitors stop and look at it, at the young woman smiling in 1942, not knowing that the man she loved would die alone in a cave halfway around the world, not knowing that her picture would be found decades later and would come to represent the personal cost of war, the individual heartbreak behind the grand historical narratives. Next to the photo is Holbrook's flight jacket, carefully preserved, the leather cracked and faded but the name still legible. People reach out as if to touch it, then stop, respecting the barrier, respecting the artifact, respecting the man who wore it. Educational programs now use Holbrook's story to teach students about World War II, about the forgotten theaters of the war, about the personal cost of conflict. His hometown of Spokane named a street after him, a small memorial park with a plaque telling his story. His name is engraved on the tablets of the missing at the Manila American Cemetery in the Philippines, along with thousands of other names representing those who were lost in the Pacific and China-Burma-India theaters. And his actual grave is in Spokane, a simple military headstone with his name, rank, dates of birth and death, and the inscription, "Lost No More." That inscription captures something essential. For 58 years, William Holbrook was lost. Lost to his family, lost to history, lost in the vastness of the mountains and the chaos of war. But he was found. He was identified. He was brought home. He was given the burial he earned, with full military honors, with his family present, with his service recognized and his sacrifice honored. In a sense, he was never truly lost. His country never forgot him, never stopped looking, never abandoned the mission to bring him home. The story raises the question, how many others are still out there, waiting to be found? How many caves and jungles and ocean depths hold the remains of warriors who haven't come home yet? The technology keeps improving, The searchers keep looking, but time is not on their side. Witnesses die, evidence degrades. Wreckage is reclaimed by nature or scavenged by locals. The window for finding the missing grows smaller every year. But the mission continues because it must. Because we owe it to them. Because the promise to bring every service member home is not conditional on convenience or cost or time. It's absolute. It's sacred. It's what separates a nation that values its warriors from one that uses them and discards them. Holbrook's return after 58 years proves that the promise can be kept, even when it seems impossible, even when decades have passed, even when the trail is cold and the chances are slim. As the sun set over Spokane on the day of William Holbrook's funeral, casting long shadows across the cemetery where he was finally laid to rest, those who knew his story reflected on what it meant. The greatest generation, we call them, and stories like Holbrook show why. Not because they won the war, though they did. Not because they saved the world from fascism, though they did. But because of what they endured individually, the personal sacrifices they made, the quiet courage they showed when everything went wrong and nobody was watching. Holbrook could have given up in that cave. He could have used his pistol on himself, ended the pain and fear and loneliness with one quick decision. Many men in similar circumstances did exactly that, and nobody judged them for it. But Holbrook didn't. He kept the pistol for defense or hunting, burned through all his ammunition doing what? We'll never know. And then, when the ammunition was gone and his strength was failing and death was inevitable, he laid down in that cave with Helen's photograph and whatever thoughts sustained him in those final moments, and he died trying to get home. That is the legacy, not the medals, though he earned them, not the memorial, though he deserves it, not the story, though it inspires. The legacy is the simple fact that William Holbrook never quit. He walked 47 miles through the Himalayas with a broken leg because quitting wasn't in him, because his crew needed him, because his country expected him to do his duty, because Helen was waiting for him in Spokane. He walked until he couldn't walk anymore, and then he crawled, and then he rested, and then he died. But he never quit. In a cave in Afghanistan, a Special Forces soldier's flashlight beam found evidence of that refusal to quit. And in finding it, connected two wars separated by 60 years, but united by the common thread of American service members doing impossible things in impossible places because the mission demanded it. The soldier who found Holbrook understood immediately what he was looking at, understood the significance, understood that this skeleton in a flight jacket was a brother in arms separated only by time, not by spirit or dedication or sacrifice. The mountains of Afghanistan have seen so much war, so much death, so many armies passing through and leaving their bones behind. The Spingar Range where Holbrook died has watched empires rise and fall, has sheltered fighters and refugees and wanderers for thousands of years. It will stand long after all current conflicts are forgotten, silent and indifferent, keeping its secrets. But for one brief moment in 2002, those mountains gave back one of their secrets. They gave back William Holbrook. They let him come home. And in that cave, now empty again, the wind still blows and the snow still falls and the stone still stands. But it's not just geology anymore. It's history. It's memorial. It's the place where an American pilot's war ended, where his courage was tested to the absolute limit, where he proved what one man can endure when he refuses to quit. The cave holds nothing now but echoes, echoes of determination, of sacrifice, of the price paid by those who serve. And sometimes, on quiet days when the wind dies down and the sun breaks through the clouds, you can almost hear them, those echoes. You can almost hear the footsteps of a pilot walking home, walking through pain and exhaustion and fear, walking toward a destination he would never reach but never stop trying to find. Walking into history, into memory, into the honor that he earned in a cave in the mountains, alone but never forgotten, lost but finally found.